Welcome to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. Today we are continuing our work on matchups and super dash spacing.
It's all or nothing. Go!
As always, I'll be playing the role of offensive player today. Otherwise, the team may end up a little bit too stressed. At least for the first half of the stream. Simplest reason, offense is hard.
なるほど。安っぽいネーミングですが、ゴールデンフリーザとでも言っておきましょうか。
あいつ本当に強いよ。
俺たちがやりたい時に
逃げたって逃げてもいいよ。や
残念
まだや
ふざけるのもいい加減にしろ。
何その面。私が惚れた男はそんなグズグズした男じゃないよ。
自然は大切にしろよ。
Android 18 win!
今さら力の違いに気づいても遅いんだよバーカ。
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Are you ready? Let's go!
これでどうだ。クリーさんこれでも食らえ。そこか。
そんなもんかよ。そんなもんかよ。
やるな。
なめんじゃねえぞ。どうしたよっなめんじゃねえ。叫んじゃねえぞ。えりゃ13ぞ。えりゃせいキャラえりゃえりゃ汗いこうふっくらったぞ。なんでだ
だだ目玉だ。そっか
13ぞ。
無駄だ。目玉だ。くたばれよ。そこだ。
うわっ
やろう。目玉だ。
来た。ありがとうございます。
さらやっやっそこか。やっとどめだ。バリアくそこんなものか。
そんなもんか。どうだ。いっぱい飛ばすぞ。そんなもんかよ。
そこだ。
どうだ。
甘い。そこだ。
やっぱり飛ばすぞ。
こんなものにそんなバカな。
俺が撃ってやる。なんでだ。なんのなんのどうだ。ここだ。よっとなめんじゃねえ。どうだ。 遅いぞ。さないぞ。どうだ。俺が撃ってやる。なんだと？遅いぞ。俺も結構やるじゃん。へへ、ちょっとは様になったかな。
The battle's about to start. Good luck. Ready? Fight! Zing!
An important part of offense is knowing how to not do all of it at once. Most players face strong offense will follow the quote-unquote correct method of dealing with it, whatever that happens to be. This means that for the most part, players who are playing too defensively are manipulable and more or less at the mercy of those who are not. The main things to prevent this from being true are when a character has strong defensive options that cover a large amount of space and don't have to be targeted all that clearly. The offensive player, in turn, eventually learns how to mess with even these very strong moves. One good option in this game is often, as mentioned before, to do your crouch heavy while going into air, with no intention whatsoever of this move actually making contact with your opponent. The result is as demonstrated. This is because the opponent is making the correct decision relative to the basic understanding of what correct means in that space. It's a relatively simple prospect because the move is not that punishing for you if you fail it, but your opponent has to worry about all sorts of little extras within it. Now eventually, as noted, yes, But that is a terrible habit that I have to actually get the team out of. When I'm using one method to beat something and you know it has an answer, this does not mean that you're supposed to apply the answer, especially if you do so on the third or fourth try of the situation. In nearly every other situation against a stronger opponent who is playing seriously, the third or fourth time is when they have chosen to mix it up and do something different to you. So, I'll note that part of the reason why you sometimes will see that turn out differently or get a strange input from me on the matter is generally because my intention has always been to get the team to understand, unless I am saying something that is a solution that I need them to demonstrate, countering what I'm doing is usually not the best idea. This works well for Frieza as noted, but because Frieza's crouch heavy in the air is not an up strike or whip, it does not deal with that. Fortunately, as a character, Frieza has a lot of other good options.
Piccolo! Win!
楽になっただろ。余計なことをごちゃごちゃ抜かしやがって。
Time to begin the match! Get ready!
In many games, offense is about that. We're used to seeing it in the form of pressure. Once the player reaches a spot close enough, they can continue to hit buttons that leave them plus or safe. The opponent has to put up with this until they stop. But this is not only just the first level of offense, it is also not super effective if your character doesn't have this sort of pressure. If you have a character who does not have these abilities, but you really want to use at least some offense, the thing you normally have to care about, therefore, is understanding what your opponent thinks is a good defensive strategy, and then find the safest or least risky thing to deal with that.
戦いの勘が鈍ってるな。すみません、少しやりすぎてしまったみたいです。
It's time to face your opponent! Get ready! Go!
俺のエネルギーは永久に減らない。俺はそう簡単にはいかんぞ。
そこだそこだビッグバン目玉だ
手を抜いているのかい？まだまだ食らってきな。そら
こんなものか
まだまだいやそら逃げてもいいよ。
くらえ枝だ甘いジックスビッグバンジッシュビッグバンたまらない激烈そこを見ている
やれやれ。
こんなものか
なるほど。虫けらが。見なさい。
まあまあだな。なめんじゃねえ。なめんじゃねえぞ。
邪魔だとけ覚悟はいいか
まあまあだな。
終わりだこんなものかなんだこれならどうだそこだあれそれ
続きやんの？
そこだ
やるね。食らっときな。ふっ
そこだ
残念だったね。
何こんなものか目玉だ目玉だ
そら逃げてもいいよ。やるね。
ここを見ている許さん目玉だ
そろそろ死にたいだろ。
やろう
そこだ。
しまった
今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。
逃がすか宇宙の塵にしてやる
なんですって。
そこだそこだ
その調子。なるほど。ちょっと脅してやるか。そろそろ死にたいだろ。ナイスだよお前。
そこだ笑わせるな
死になさい。今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。
それがてめえの正体かフリーザ。
なるほど。虫けらが。
なめんじゃね
ちょっと
え。
脅してやる。
こんなもんかよ。
許さん
なんだと？
遅いぞ。生意気だよ。
やるじゃねえか。油断してたぜ。
ここはお任せしますよ。
どうなんだ。
お前たちが武士道精神を大事に
逃げた
している
て逃げてもいいよ。
その鬱陶しい口を
手を抜
黙らせて
いているのかい？
この野郎
まだまだ。やっまだまだ。くそだね。またな。
自然は大切にしろよ。
Android 18 Win
これが元神の力ってやつか。あんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね。
For passive characters like Brawly and to some extent Android 16, you don't need as many of the same things. Your general methodology once you're in the air, especially if you instant air dash, is simply to not necessarily pick randomly, but you can choose fairly early into your approach what you think your opponent's response will be and have a much higher chance of hitting them. Since both of the moves these characters use for this approach are actually not going to be anywhere near the opponent, they generally don't get punished all that hard. Pair this with the correct assist and you basically have a free way in. "16" only needs to do one downward attack, and Brawly actually has outright normals that do this job. As demonstrated there, you can simply put yourself in spaces where the opponent cannot react easily, and then do what is effectively an approach mix-up from there, which is what makes these characters powerful in these ways. If your opponent is ready with their crouch heavy, they may get something out of it. But this is particularly useful against players who don't stay on the ground for their defense. So given the known fighting style of the entire team, this is likely to be fairly effective. Just look at those beautiful air normals. Brawly has an even bigger advantage in a way that is not easily understood when you first start off. A character that has huge moves or very long range on their normals, even if they are not a zoner, can use that same style of approach, making sure to leap at the opponent from the longest possible range. And basically, assuming or hoping that if they do it correctly, they'll land outside of the range where the opponent could hit a button, but where they still get to hit one. Usually, even better, the button they hit with punishes the opponent. Cell is in a bit of a different space, given that he often must do this with specials or misleading air stuff himself. But he still has overall the same abilities. Of course, this is not to say that you should generally just approach from the air with Brawly, but rather that he as a character has so many good options for his approach that he basically gets to live up to the relentless concept that he was designed for. Of the three characters, Cell probably has the most trouble dealing with aerial opponents, as most of his beams, blasts, anything long range that is using the special button from Cell normally won't hit an opponent that is slightly off the ground. In this particular team, the assists don't do a great job of this either. Making life a little hard in that department. On the other hand, this is still sort of good because it gets you used to doing this with just Cell, and Cell is, in this case, often ending up being the last standing character on this team. This is by design. The other two don't need a lot of meter to do their job. Cell, on the other hand, While he does not need it, he does a really good job once he has enough. So we expect to see a couple more spirited clashes between these two players today based on those things. Against this team, that entire option set is much, much less effective. All these characters have some way of stopping it entirely, whether it be Gohan's uppercut, Krillin's air Kamehameha, or just about anything Trunks feels like doing. However, there is an upside to it. In order to be ready for these things, even with their long range, these characters cannot necessarily count on being able to respond to you just walking forward without doing just very minor clip damage. At a certain range, therefore, if you think the opponent is going to make a counter-strike, you can just jump then. Even though your own character is quite oppressive, sometimes that oppressiveness has to play out by just walking. When your opponent's air defense is too good, you really have no options. But on the other side, you get to use your character's really long and really tricky buttons for extreme range attacks. This makes punishes on you even harder and allows you to set up a bunch of things. The important thing is not to do this too early, as it can be really simple to get the feeling that if you don't move, your opponent will move and ruin your day before you can do anything. But these characters aren't really that good at that. And if they're managing to deal with you really easily, then you probably need to work on your defense more so that you can get to the next part of the match. It is often a problem in fighting games for a player to solve their problems by being more aggressive or more random or more overall shifty, when their problem is that they feel like that because their defense is not good enough. It's why it's so important to learn just how good your defense is and decide if you're going to work on it or not. For example, in the case of Broly, Broly's long buttons mean that he actually has really good mid-range defense, he just doesn't convert well into damage from it. He uses his oppression to get his damage, but pure range will handle his defense. 16 can do similar things, waiting for the right moment to go for his long crouch medium, or mix that up with his command grab. This forces the opponent to constantly be on the lookout for situations in which they quote-unquote might get hit, which drastically changes how the matchup feels for them as well. Especially in this case with Cell down, using your meter on the X command grab from 16 is probably one of your better options purely because of this. Being able to recognize this would also help you make other decisions. When to switch out, when to activate your sparking, and so on. The ability to play the mid-range and neutral almost automatically can help a lot in these situations.
行くぞチューさあ行くぞ殲滅する
It's very important to understand the strengths of your character in neutral, or their lack thereof. If you feel they aren't that good in neutral, then deal with the situation some other way.
これ以上好きにさせんぞ。お前はもう終わりだ。完全に消え去ってしまえ。
As a result, that got way closer.
誤算だったな。もっと強くならなければ、まだ見ぬ敵を倒すために。
When facing opponents with equally long mid-range, or even just slightly shorter than you, the reason why this will become difficult is because they will have a similar game plan, not necessarily because of you messing up your spacing directly, but rather the fact that your opponent will have a different concept of how to use the space you're giving them. One good example is that in this case, it's not at all helpful to try to do counters or similar with my characters in this position. Yes, you will land a couple, but for the most part this is a terrible idea, just based on safety. Or rather, this is entirely being used as an offensive tool at the moment. As Piccolo does somewhat teleport forward, and the knowledge that the opposing player has a particular intention changes the flow. One good example here is, understanding that Frieza's options in these spaces is not exactly the same as the others, and making the adjustments required. But you should not necessarily attempt to adjust before your opponent does, unless you are too low on health to be sure that it's fine. Power tail.
虫けらとミキッと超回復
どこへ行く
なるそろそろ死にたいだろそろそろ死にたいクズめ
There is actually an answer to this option system from... It is actually just a hit stand heavy lock.
どこへいいだろう終わりだ
恨むんならてめえの運命を恨むんだなこの俺のようにざまあみやがれ
I just realized he says that way. That should be a joke. I will find a better way to make that a joke. You would have had to play the original Final Fantasy Tactics to understand the joke I would end up making, but I'll figure out somehow.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble! Ready? Fight! 山をするな!
You can see how all the additional mobility in Broly's game plan causes issues for characters with shorter buttons. And you can technically also see why and how Cell sort of lack the same capacity. But Cell is good at staying out of trouble and therefore letting his teammates heal up.
まあまあだな。叫んじゃねえぞ。なめんじゃねえ。よくもこけにしてくれたな。なめんじゃねえ。
Oh, that fell a little short. But yes, it is important to understand that Brawly is a character who you have to play with those same big boy buttons, as people like to call them. Fortunately, as you would know if you've watched our Monday streams, our Brawly player is also an Alex player and is quite familiar with this whole concept. I'm always amazed at how similar those two characters are. Which was probably completely unintentional, as I doubt Akira Toriyama really created Brawly by playing fighter being in an arcade. But then again, I would never be surprised of anything from Akira Toriyama.
It's time to face your opponent!
Many of the more trained options of Siren's team don't work as well on Omnilatter. However, one of the things that makes the biggest effect is Kid Blue's zoning, meaning that often preserving Kid Blue at least a bit is really helpful, as fighting from basically full screen is honestly really effective. When your opponent is tired of this, because that's how things tend to work emotionally, and enough meter has been built up through it to give Bardock some good options, then you can switch in. Vegeta doesn't really need it, and does better as an assist, but when Bardock needs the equivalent of zoning from his side. On the other hand, having Vegeta soak up some damage and opponent meter and other things, and then just get switched back out, probably for the now recovered Kid Buu, once again shifts your situation. If Bardock has used all the meter and Kid Buu is not ready yet, or you feel as if you might not be able to handle the current character, but still have enough strength from Vegeta, at worst he will still cut some damage and convert it into, effectively, meter. That is what actually makes decisions like that. When you realize your situation has gotten bad, the character you need you're going to lose. At the end of the day, having strong sparking on your last character is only really going to work for you if you've reached a level of mastery with that one character where you expect sparking will change the matchup in some way, and therefore make you able to do what you somehow could not do before. At this level of health, Vegeta is still a functional assist, and Kid Buu is good at buying time to use assists. In fact, he's ridiculously good at it. Similarly, Bardock with way more health, or at least what was way more health, has some options here. As you get into higher levels of the game, this rhythmic changing of characters is likely to lead to you getting hurt, unless you do it in your combos, so you still have to work a bit harder. But this shouldn't stop you from making the requisite game plans and getting used to making them. It will just change the condition in which you can achieve the thing in question. At lower levels, you can just draw tag and solve the problem that way. At higher levels, you need to be able to get something started so you can do the switch. But the timings and mental reasonings behind the switch generally shouldn't change. Understanding how to switch in and out your characters so that they heal up correctly is one of the more important parts of your team synergy. Technically, I would say it's probably more important than assists and how to use them at beginner levels, because at beginner levels you may still be experimenting with different things, different parts of matchups, and optimal times to use assists. But for the most part, unless you are going to convert into massive damage from doing so, they're probably not having too much of an effect on your improvement. You can, of course, improve your use of the assist and change the situations you end up in, but that's more so affecting whether or not you're winning than overall improvement of your awareness and skill as a player, other than obviously improving the use of the assist itself. For example, I want to heal here, but that doesn't mean I get to. But I need Frieza because Bardock is a very long-range character if the player is deciding to just be aggressive.
逃げたって逃げてもいいよ。
But since I'm not interested in being defended out today, ooh, fell short.
Get ready for battle! Ready?
はいいか。
遊びは終わりだ。楽しめ。行くぞ。
手を抜いているのかい？
どこへ。
行くよ。やっ、黙っときな。
来い。行くぞ。行くぞ。今度は俺が相手だ。魔をするんだと殺してやる。ここは任せたぞ。何なんだ。来い。無駄なことをさせず殲滅する。
その程度ですか。ほらそら。もう距離なの。ちょっと落ち着けやる。もう許さない。甘いですよ。そこですよ。その程度ですか。なるほど。絶対に許さんぞ。1対1ならこいつも。
どこへ。お前たちが戦う意志を見せなければ、俺はこの星を破壊し尽くすだけだ。終わったな。所詮クズはクズなのだ。
So we've reached the halfway point of the stream, and the others are probably warmed up enough that I don't have to play offense fully anymore.
Piccolo-san, 行きますよ。トランクス、本気でかかってこい。このままでは。行くぞ。行くぞ。覚悟はいいか。行くぞ。
This also allows me to play with a lot more Dragon Rush, based on the idea and flow of my opponents generally not being so interested in attacking. Once this is done, it's a little bit easier to set up certain things. Oh, no choice.
虫けらがなかなか後悔します。もうここまでだ。そこです。そろそろし生意気だよ。そろそろし生意気だよ。ちょっとここですよ。ここはお任せしますよ。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。
逃げたく逃げてもいいよ。
そこで
そう俺が相手だ。ここだ。カメハメハ
許さん。
ブロックリーン終わりだ。
行くぞ。捕らえた。
行くぞ。
そこだ。
俺ならどうだ。行くぞ。
Dragon Rush is a generally good way to build up enough meter to do certain types of flow. If you could get it landed often enough, you will always get at least a stock of meter out of it. And you'll be able to use this for vanishes and other things.
Get ready for battle!
Super Saiyajin は孫悟空さん一人じゃない。
It's all or nothing! Go!
こんなものか。ビッグバンそこだ。行くぞ。しまった。まだまだ。
調子に乗るな。
俺が撃ってやる。このゲームじゃねえぞ。いや相手だ。なんのそんなもんかよ。終わりじゃねえか。なめんじゃねえ。どうした。修行の成果を見せてやる。遅いぞ。なんの逃がさないぞ。戦闘だ。ちょっとね。そんなもんかよ。そんなもんかよ。なめんじゃねえ。どうした。どうした。
これから見せるのが本当の力だ。
どうした。どうした。やるじゃねえか。そんなもんかよ。遅いぜ。ここは譲ってやるか。
どうなっても知らんぞ。
俺がやってやら。どうした。遅いぜ。まあまあだな。なめんじゃねえ。なめんじゃねえ。
これ以上好きにさせんぞ。
どうした。てめえらと出来が違うんだよ。出来が。
The battle's about to start. Good luck!
With this team, it's difficult to get to a very precise space without ending up overshooting it. Therefore, for Brawly and the others, this is a much more static movement style. However, they can still use the Dragon Rush in certain spaces where the opponent is uncertain due to the strength of their buttons. When the opponent has not yet committed to anything, you have this option. This then makes them commit more and empowers Brawly's armored moves and similar. Bell has similar abilities, though he obviously does not have armor. He does have quite a few spacings and movements that can make it difficult for the opponent when facing at that range. As characters go though, he needs to assist a bit more for setting up things like dragon rushes and mix-ups. "16 has the obvious option of using his EX meter to go for the land grab from the ground and not have to worry about getting into Dragon Rush range in the first place. But of course this requires meter, which would be more easily gained if one was managing Dragon Rush. He is, however, a character with a really good command and control of what happens directly after this. All characters do have good combos, but not all characters have combos that put you exactly where they want them. Learning to read the spaces where your opponent will or will not commit to particular things is a good way to manage timing for Dragon Rush, even if you're not the sort of player who can put up good offense yourself. The vast majority of mid-level fighting game players have a very large vulnerability in the moment where they are working on a decision as to what they want to do from their side. This happens because until you have got to the point where it's natural and easy to play neutral or whatever else, you know all your options and so on, that moment where you must assess the situation is almost always a break in your defense, because you don't want to hit buttons, because then that would prevent you from using other buttons. This is partially why things like Dragon Rushes and dash-up throws are so potent when you're first learning the game. It isn't necessarily that the move is unreactable or particularly difficult to catch, but rather that you can only do it when you are specifically not thinking of doing anything of your own. In order to properly push an opponent to the point where this works, at least where it works consistently, you do have to have some measure of confusing offense. From the other side, though, we can deal with an opponent who is functionally always committed. They're either in or they're out. Against this form of opponent, your best bet is almost always to be doing a move that moves you out of the spacing they expect. Whatever that move happens to be. Part of why this is so important is that if an opponent has no reason in their mind to stop moving or attacking or even hitting buttons, your primary method of dealing with them must involve a similar mindset, but at a different rhythm. You'll notice that my opponent basically never stops attacking until they have been punished for it or it's been pointed out in some way that they shouldn't continually attack that much. Then the attacking stops almost entirely, allowing this to happen. Even in that situation, again, my opponent basically just continues to hit buttons. The key, therefore, is to whiff punish those buttons consistently and never be exactly where they expect you to be. But that was my fault. Do not doubt me when I say my opponent will never stop hitting buttons.
よく頑張ったがとうとう終わりの時が来たようだな。
Brace yourself for the coming battle! Are you ready? Fight it out!
Never that. I have to do that because Frieza really enjoys it in the lore.
yourself for the coming battle.
Last time, this shifted because of the stress of the Trunks versus Bardock matchup. When faced with that sort of situation, obviously you can decide, should I focus on how I can set up the other matchups, or should I learn to play that one? Generally, the way to do this is to decide based on whether or not it's your point character that you have, and whether or not the matchup gets any easier for that character when they have meter available. If you're in learning mode, and this matchup does not get better with meter available, you might as well leave them in and try to do your best to get it, because they're going to fall at some point anyway. They might as well fall when you know for sure that the meter will be used by other characters, and when you can possibly get them out more easily to heal them as needed. So now in this case it's a little safer. Trunks is at advantage, but he now has no meter, so I guess we're playing it out without it. However, having Bardock on lower health means that Trunks can take somewhat comfort in the fact that his opponent might be not as willing to take as much risk. That said, with 7 bars of meter, conversions could be a big deal. On the other hand, even a conversion into a big attack from Bardock is only enough to take Trunks down once we've gotten to a certain point. Raw level 3 on the other hand is always devastating. And it didn't look like it turned out that well there. Matchups can be very dependent on the player's style, so I will say with the caveat that we're speaking specifically about the styles of these two players, that matchup looks really hard. In all arrogance, I looked at that and could not think of a single way to make it better. But we are back to the attempts to trap aerial opponents, but also to use long buttons. Generally against a very aggressive opponent, you should first check whether or not blocking is sufficient, i.e., are they actually using this to set up pressure? And of course, if it turns out blocking is not sufficient, look for the space in which you can deflect, because the deflect automatically knocks the opponent away and does outright solve the problem for most characters. Some you just have to deflect them twice. But it's more important to think about this not as a blocking situation, but as something to do in scrambles. And this can sometimes be frustrating, as it's sometimes better to go for your own buttons in scrambles, since you simply don't know whether or not you're at advantage or not until you've learned quite a lot about the game. Neither is a really good habit to build up. They have pros and cons in both matchups, character matchups, and obviously player matchups. That was more so a matter of not remembering or recognizing the situation in which sparking would have been best in that matchup. Having strong plans can help you with this. There are certain games, very few, but a few, where you actually got to choose when to use that sort of comeback style ability. Retro gamers will know that in Garo Mark of the Wolves, you actually get to set at what segment of your health, you get to use your more powerful desperation style move.
Time to begin the match.
Having a specific plan in mind related to when you want to use your Sparking Blast will help you keep in mind the rest of the matchup as well.
Get ready.
For example, for me it was intended from the beginning to force this situation and therefore use the Sparking Blast just to recover Frieza's health and not much else.
なんだもう終わりか。もう少し楽しめるかと思ったんだけどね。
This should be a great fight!
And off we go into another game of push and pull. Note as always that we are going into the final hour of our lobby.
It's all or
You feel free to join us. We are in US East Coast Lobby 02, Ring Match Priority Lobby 2. And as you'd expect, given the name of the stream, we are standing outside of Kame House. Passcode for the lounge can be found on our Twitter, but it never changes, 2717. We are still quite functionally at the beginner, barely leaving beginner level for the most part. Trunks level 3. Barely enough. Time freeze helps. So will of course remain dangerous as long as he has those 7 bars. But with this amount of health, Krillin's probably the best character to soak it up. He's hard for Cell to hit before then, meaning that it's more likely that Cell will end up converting off of a single opportunity. Of the things in this game that are not quite true to the lore, deflecting Solar Kamehameha with one hand is probably among them.
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Are you ready? Let's go!
なん来いどこへ行くこれしてやるどこへ行くんだもう何もう行くぞ邪魔をするなかんぞ邪魔だ俺がお持ちになるとはクゼ何楽しめるうまいそんなのそこだろ立て直す遊びは終わりだかんぞ行くぞ俺も私になら覚悟しろ私にバリアをするそうだろバラバラにしてやる来た
One big blast, but again, not really going to necessarily do a whole ton given where the sparking situation was already. However, adding even more damage to that does help out. In the end though, the situation was probably very specific to that and ended with advantage as a whole on Naka's side, even though Cell was lost. With these two together, it is much more likely to be possible to be precise enough to win, as the remaining character on the other side is a Cell with Variable Meter. Have you ever tried to open someone up with a sweep with a Cell? I mean, obviously it's possible, but you really wouldn't want to have to do it a lot. Leave that sort of thing to the top level players of the world. But at least he doesn't take a lot of damage while all this is going on, which might be enough to get the win on its own. Was that moment? Just enough this time. However, Vegeta is still ahead and that sparking is going to run out. Meteor-wise, I meant. But not this time.
nothing. Fight it out.
Today we're gonna be really working on opening up people. In order to truly open up, as they say, a defensive enough player, you have to be super careful about when exactly you inch forward. A lot of this is about overwhelming your opponent with not only your speed, but those moments where you don't use your speed. Or alternate uses of your speed. It is in this situation where having characters who lunge or have long moves, attacks, can be helpful to you. But in order for this to work, you have to let go entirely of the concept of watching where your own character is and build up a muscle memory or a mental map of where they will be when you hit certain buttons. Slowing down your overall movement can help with this, as you generally have just enough time to blink and look where you are, and during those times where your opponent does stop attacking, you get to do this measurement. Now note, I started talking about this from the perspective of opening up an opponent with good defense. An opponent with sufficiently good defense does not move during that moment where you can reposition. It takes a little while to learn this, but you should learn it regardless of whether or not you are an offensive player by nature or not. The question of how much payoff you get from it has more to do with how good your character is at repositioning with moves, but you should still note that nearly every defensive player will give you just enough time to set your precise position on the screen before continuing your attack and rushing at them, quickly try to overwhelm them or catch them off guard is really unlikely to work. Meaning you might as well take your opportunity to put yourself in the right spot and ignore anything else. It also creates that situation where you never have the intention of going straight in, but your opponent's defensive reaction is intended to stop you as if you were going to, meaning you can often block it. From the defensive player's side, the situation gets a little easier if they just ignore your position altogether. This may seem a little weird, and is in fact a little random. But the concept being that if your opponent is within a general region, treat them as if they're at the front of that region. And if you have a safe-ish attack to launch at the front of their general region, do that, even if it would whiff where they currently are. It's important, of course, that this move be relatively safe, but if you're playing defensive characters, there's a good chance you can get away with it. Nappa, for example, has various ground explosion style moves, which work well in that situation overall. If you have no reasoning and no attack, chances are your best bet is to backdash, as it will change your opponent's spacing relative to you. And at the very least, help you understand what is going on. If your opponent is particularly good or particularly daring, you'll still lose. In fact, they'll chase down the backdash more often than not, because it's at that point reactable. Given what their plan was up until that point, they were only doing a small move, and your backdash is seen, even if it does not getting hit during the backdash, which is less likely. Backdashing will drop your defensive positioning, as you cannot respond directly after one without probably like a level 3. It will, however, give you a very clear insight into what your opponent's thoughts on the matter are. Are they more interested in going in no matter what, once they have repositioned a little bit and given you that moment? Are they only pausing long enough to maybe evade your strike? Or are they actually trying to calculate a way in based on exactly where you are? This is partially why it becomes much more difficult to handle that style of player when you as a defensive player are in the corner. Meaning, of course, that your last option is always to just vanish. Since at least, even if this is blocked, even though it costs you meter, and even though it can generally lead to you taking just as much damage, if you were really worried about being cornered and overwhelmed, it's always better to be mid-screen than cornered in Dragon Ball FighterZ. For the defensive player, you absolutely don't want to be near the corner. Other people have stronger combos, better setups. And you have less defensive options as a whole. Vegeta is actually an interesting character for this because, unlike nearly everyone else in the game, Vegeta gets to move while doing this style. This is because if Vegeta properly whiffs with his forward kick, Even though he is punishable, the situations in which your opponent is likely to punish him are the same situations you wanted to create in the first place. In other words, aim to whiff with that move, just to barely whiff in front of you. Use whichever version is most likely to lead to that precise situation. Sells power in the trade room.
よく頑張ったがとうとう終わりの時が来たようだな。
It's time to face your opponent.
Unlike Vegeta, who will go into certain moves and be able to use an invincible move right after, Cell and Nappa do not have this option to just immediately do something that will whiff in front of you. Nappa can, however, do something similar to instant jump down heavy, which is always useful for him. And Cell is one of the stronger characters in the game when it comes to just doing instant air dash and going on the offense instead in the same situations you'd think of standard defense. He has good buttons and they do lead into a lot more things than most characters.
そらやまだまだ手を抜いているのかい17個まだまだ手を抜いているのかい
すぐに終わらせてやる。
黙っときなそら手を抜いている逃げた
こいつはどうか
や手を抜いているのか
どうして
や17個完全放題
この星もろとも
絶対にこの忍者様の相手だ。
ちょっとますよこの星もろとも貴様らのゴミにしてやる
終わらせるぜ。
ここですよ
無駄だ野郎。終わりだ。脅かしやがって。やるな。究極のパワーを。覚悟はいいか。この土ならいい栽培なんですよ。終わりだ。仕方がありませんね。
今度はこっちからやらせてもらうよ。どうだい？甘いですよ。そこですよ。甘いですよ。この星もろとも貴様をゴミにしてやる。
脅かしやがって。
あいつ本当に使うのそら手を抜いているのかどこ見てんのさこれが元神の力ってやつかあんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけどね
As the speed of the game increases, it can become difficult to keep track of your plan relative to your meter. Opponents that pin you down quickly when you're using characters who do not have strong invincible level 3s can often make it feel as if there's really nothing to use the meter on. But do remember that in the absolute pinch, you do have the option of using your Z change, which is basically while blocking, press forward and the assist you want to call, to break out of the situation. This move is fairly guaranteed as well. If the pressure was real, you're going to get out of it.
It's all or nothing.
Nappa's good defense means he becomes a very assist-dependent character. He's good at buying time, and building up a lot of options for his teammates. Ooh, only barely made that actually. He's also therefore often the character who most often ends up needing the Sparking Blast. But if you don't end up using it with him, it's almost always a sign that something else has gone relatively well. Or absolutely terribly, in which case you really didn't have much option in the first place. Well, we're back to Vegeta and his precise spacings. The reason it is so important for Vegeta to use that kick and basically whiff against offensive opponents is the exact same reason why he nearly never wants to do it on defensive ones. In the case of the defensive opponent, he gets to use the standard jumping crouch heavy. Well, jumping 2H.
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Ready? Go! Counter!
If you start from the concept that you will probably find the timing or spacing that dash, it becomes easier to see when that's probably not what you should actually do. And therefore, you know when to hit buttons. So Nappa can come into his element now, buying some time for Cell. And building up that nice long assist. He's more or less self-sufficient in most combo departments, meaning that he really doesn't need to call anyone else to help him with assists on offense. He can call Cyberman for that. And there you see one of the strongest aspects of that kick. Vegeta not only bounces off the opponent when he uses it, and if they're not really ready for it, they don't have anything they can do. If he does whiff, and the opponent thinks they can get him, he can do his invincible move. If he hits but thinks the opponent is not ready and has neither, he can in fact convert into Vanish. Similar to Adult Gohan's uppercut. While this is not strictly a mix-up as it doesn't lead to too much from his side, again, repositioning, proper use of assists, all help out. And of course then you simply activate Nappa's sparking and the whole thing starts over. This enhances Nappa even more because when you are sparking, your assists recharge faster, meaning he basically has 2 new moves. With this particular team having all their assists available, drastically changes the opponent's available options. Cell does, however, have to use Nappa's assist help more so as an offensive tool in semi-pressure situations, making it a little bit more awareness heavy.
Time to begin the match! Get ready! Fight!
こいつだぞ。状態だ。この程度か。
手を抜いているのか。残念だったね。
こいつだぞ。
やるね。そら。や。まだまだ。
神々。
17号。
今度は中華をね。楽しませてくれよ。ちょっと脅してやるか。その程度ですか。ちょっと脅してやるか。絶対に許さんぞ。ここはお任せしますよ。
逃げたって逃げてもいいよ。残念。そら。や。そら。そら。そら。
頼むベジータ。この土ならいい栽培まで育つ。
や。そら。や。そら。17の効率はどうだい。宇宙の塵にしてやる。
もういい。やれやれ。今度は静かにね。死になさい。かかったね。なるほど。死になさい。
軽いね。
世話が焼けるな。
俺たちがやりたい時にやる。
そら。17号。
お前たちが武士道精神を大事にしていると見込んで、
まだそら。17号。そら。17号。
1対1の試合を邪魔する者はいないと思う。
逃げたって逃げてもいいよ。
この俺も参加させてもらう。俺の夢をやるな。
や。
お前たちが武士道精神を大事にしていると見込んで、それだけは言っておくぜ。
や。そら。
1対1の試合を邪魔する。その鬱陶しい口を黙らせて
や。
死ぬほどやってやるか。
1対1ならこいつも終わりだ。ゴールをするぜ。でもくれ。せいやせいや消えろ。卵ごときにすぐに終わらせてやる。覚悟はいいか。せいや覚悟はいいか。この星もろとも俺だ。生意気だよお前。生意気だよお前。そろそろ死にたいだろ。生意気だよ。絶対に許さんぞ。行くぞ。ちょっと本気を出しますよ。しまったね。1対1ならこいつも終わりだ。せいやどうだ。たまれ。調子に乗りやがって。ファイナルバカな。どうしたベジータ。その程度なのか。 筋はいい。だがまだまだといったところだな。
This should be a great fight! Get ready! Fight! Counter! 楽しませてくれよ。目障りだ。すぐに終わらせてやる。さてと。スピードには自信があるんだ。くだらん。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。どうした？
クリリンさん、引退しても力は衰えていないな。僕も見習わなくちゃ。
showdown is about to begin! Get ready! Fight!
終わりだ。この程度になったか。悪夢はいくぞ。くらえ。くらえ。それでもまだせるから飛べ。くそ。ほらそらそら。
Amazing!
なんだって行くぞ。そらそらそら。覚悟しろ。
早く勝負をつけなきゃね。ほら、やっ黙っときな。17号まだ17号離せてもらうよ。くらえ17号
俺のエネルギーは永久に減らない。
まだやっ17号
俺のエネルギーは永久に減らない。
ほら、やっ逃げたか逃げてもいいよ。黙っときな。17号まだ閉めて黙っときよ。17号こいつはどうだい。
その星もろとも貴様らをゴミにする。なるほど。生意気だよお前。貴様を通すこの俺だ。ちょっと遅いよ。その程度ですか。いますよ。出番ですよ。
そら
はい。オッケー。
惜しかったな。
まだやっ黙っときな。
雑魚が。
黙っときな。黙っときな。
この俺が押し
どうしたカメハメハ。さてと。
俺たちはやりたい時に
地球ごと消えてた。
そろそろ死にたいだろ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。
調子に乗るな。
そろそろ死に生意気だよ。その程度ですか。生意気だよ。
うるさいね。
そろそろ死にさようならベジータさん。さあそのまま命乞いをなさい。絶対に許しませんけどね。
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Ready? Fight!
こいつはどうか。
Fantastic!
くだらん。 スピードには自信があるんだ。受けてみろ。
Oh, fell a little short there, and that brings that to an end. Just as we are bringing this stream to an end because it's 10 o'clock. This will be our last match on stream. And the lobby also closes at the end of stream for this week. You can join us tomorrow for our disguise on our last bot for a while. We found a better way to have Super Dash. Cat has done. Finally finding a group of characters for whom this works, although you will need, and this in this case need, at least Android 21. If you want to get a little bit more information on that, you can give it a shot with Android 21, Yamcha, and Krillin. And stop by tomorrow for a full explanation along with point system. On Monday we will be having our mishmashing Street Fighter round. Same time. Duration shorter by 1 hour. On Tuesday, our Guilty Gear Tuesday training inner lobby. Sort of intermediate by now, I guess. Which will last about the same amount of time. And next Wednesday, more standby casuals in Street Fighter 5. Bringing us back around to next Thursday, and of course, another Kame. Although the Kame House in question is likely to be somewhat shorter, due to obviously the holidays. But if you don't celebrate it and still want to get some Dragon Ball in, feel free to join us then. This has been Willian142MK. Good night, everyone.